announcements about the forthcoming talk. So on the 23rd of April 2013, we have Professor Kumar from the University of Delhi, and he will be presenting a paper on titled Deep Structures, the Capital of the Sultans and the Riverine Plain of Delhi. And on the 25th to 27th, we have a 3-day conference, and the title of the conference is Thinking Through the Law, South Asian Histories and the Legal Archives, and this is in association with Professor Nehru from JNU and Dr. Rashmi Pant from NMNS, Professor Janki Nair from JNU, Dr. Aparna Balchandran, and Professor Bhavani Raman. So I urge you to attend this. There is one more. On the 30th of April, we have, as part of the weekly seminar, a presentation by Dr. Trista Wahi from NMMS on irrigation, state and society in pre-colonial India. So, welcome you to a talk by Professor Deepak Kumar from JNU, and the title of the paper is Reason, Science and Religion, Gleanings from the Colonial Past. Professor Deepak Kumar teaches the history of science, and also researches on science and society, and he's been doing this for the past 35 years. He's known for his book, Science and the Raj, from Oxford University Press. And I think that was much to
Thank you very much, and I'm grateful to my distinguished colleagues and friends for sparing their time. I've been basically an archive man who has spent most of his time at National Archives, and seldom done secondary reading, very weak in that. So when new themes or sub-themes came to my mind, emerged in the course of my researches, I found it little challenging. This particular piece, which is going to be part of my forthcoming work, yet to be published, is based more on secondary sources and probably reflections which you may find sometimes problematic, sometimes provocative. Permit me to begin with an interesting track which I came across. Probably it is part of your Tirumurti also, I'm not sure, but I saw it in Bihar State Archive out of the Rajendra Prasad papers. In 1954, the first President of India wrote few letters to a person whom he addresses as Gurudev with great amount of reverence, and when I tried to find out, I couldn't find his name later also, but it seems he was a translator or an occult, whatever from. And in that letter he refers to him in glowing terms and says that, a particular idol of Devi you have given to me, I put a vermilion sindoor on it, rub it on the Purnamasi day, and so forth on a plain paper, etc. He also expresses his differences with Pandit Nehru on certain questions. In fact, I can quote him in Hindi, written in Hindi, his own handwriting, where it is, he says, पंडित जी ने इधर कुछ कहा है जिससे मेरे दिमाग में बहुत खलबली मच गई है, खलबली शब्द है इसमें. Or he goes a little further also, there was something happening in Pakistan those days, and he writes कि आखिर हम वहाँ के दिक्कतों से कैसे निपटे, आप कुछ हमारा मार्गदर्शन करें. गुरुदेव replies, very interesting replies. गुरुदेव से, राजेंद्र, जब से तुम मेरे शरण में आए हो, तुम्हारा रक्षा करना मेरा कर्तव्य है, और मैं सूक्ष्म दृष्टि से सब देख रहा हूँ, और मुझे अपने भक्तों के लिए सब कुछ करना पड़ता है। कई बार तो वो आगे पीछे भी जाते हैं, लोग पर लोग मुझे घूमना होता है, बहुत तरह की बातें मिलती है। उनसे लोग कहते हैं कि तुम्हारा you are under my protection. And they used to throw, the term used is sitting, through sitting. I couldn't understand. Here is a very bright product, very devoted, very thoughtful, one of the highly inspiring characters of product of national movement. And a person who wrote Divided India, this very thorough, wonderful section of Hindu-Muslim politics in 1944, within 8-9 years he is asking a Tantrik how to deal with Pakistan. I was absolutely surprised. What happened? Had it something to do with only faith? Which of course is important. Faith, we are all subject to faith, we are all party to certain amount of, look forward to faith, etc. For several reasons. Or it was a rational choice of his part. Was he being rational while asking for this? And it is interesting that, he got the second time also somehow. Probably the Tantric sort of way. And whatever speak. It was a very fascinating reading. And then you come across several, went back to the 19th century, several sources. You come across those dialogues between faith and reason. Though I have used the term religion, but it is more in terms of organized system, not in terms of dharma, because it may be again problematic to understand dharma in terms of religion. One of the things which whenever we grapple with this question of modernity, which has been going on for the last 200 years, what constitutes modernity, what it is, and so forth. So there, reason is being talked about as the most important thing, the kernel of. And it does refer to critical consciousness, the spirit to interrogate, and so forth. Now, interrogation is something which has never been alien to the Indian society. Look into our ancient shastras, people did ask in terms of, questions were asked. You have the use of the term yukti, Charak Samhita, for example, which is reason. You have Tarkavidya, you have Anvishiki, which is investigation in a scientific sense. Anumana, intelligence reference, inference, Pramana, Ekusastra, etc. So we have a very long tradition of, and many people have worked into it, worked on it, so Deepak Chakraparthy and so many. So it is not that in Indian society has been ever displayed lack in terms of rational explanation. Historically speaking, that's no doubt about it. However, there is another significant term which occurs almost in every generational text. It's anubhuti, experiential knowledge. So we have instances of the Adi Shankara himself put more emphasis on anubhuti than what he considered as shushka tarka. If this both coexisted, in some ways or other, we will see that despite these dichotomies, both coexisted, and the stream of knowledge continued to flourish, continued to move on and flourish. Here, I would like to pause a bit and also argue that the Indian system today has become very fashionable to talk in terms of knowledge society, knowledge economy, and so forth, as if it was not there in earlier times. The truth is, it has always been a knowledge society. Our economy has always been a knowledge economy, and so forth. So, but here the difference is slight difference which we tend to overlook is the way knowledge was conceived, the way knowledge was propagated, the way knowledge moved from one generation to another. In our culture area, the way it moved was more through writing commentaries. when you have, every generation writing commentary over the work done previously. And in this process of writing commentary, for example, in medical sciences, you come across several instances of Nehru and, similar kinds of work. Some people may even argue that Indian knowledge system didn't display what you may call colonial paradigm shift. To my mind, it is arguable. Paradigm shifts do take place, of course, in different ways, subtle ways, softer ways, and ours has been, I suspect, a polite civilization where, paying respect to the existing or previous knowledge, we sometimes added to it, or sometimes subtracted from it. And this is how it moved on. So, this addition and subtraction had been going on all the time. And this has been one of the very interesting features of Indian knowledge system or knowledge history. That is movement through commentaries. And in this process, there appeared something, if you don't call it paradigm shift, at least there did appear something called canonized knowledge, where it is Shastra Sammat. And once it becomes Shastra Sammat, then it was very difficult for someone who could be a rebel to challenge it. Or potential rebellion was suppressed or controlled through this Shastra Sammat jnana. Some people did perish in the process, and you have several instances. Astronomy, for example, 6th century, this very interesting guy who talks about, who knew that the solar and lunar eclipses take place because of certain objects, shadow falling upon another, but still decided to withdraw, arguing that the Puranas had talked about Rahu and Ketu, therefore the Puranas must be correct. Now Puranas by that time, 6th century, had become a canonized text. So, so there is a one step forward, two steps backwards. It continues to go. And this is true in 17th century Europe also is happening. It is not that it is something unique to Indian culture. However, in this process, still during this process, our knowledge system continued to gain, and compositions were made which have definitely left a great impact on our society, and which is still part of our proud inheritance. In Islamic culture also, which comes to us little late, but there also you have the difference of opinion between maqul and manqul, between ilm dunya, ilm adyan, and that has been there in the Islamic society going on earlier also. So you have the instances of Ibn Sina, Al-Razi, Haytham, many others, who stood by the truth, what they observed, and sometimes they paid a price for it also. They suffered also in the process. Before I move to the advent of the modern, which in 19th century is the area about the period about which I try to learn a little bit, not much on pre-modern times. However, I would like to put forward that pre-modern time, the so-called Mughal, pre-Mughal, early medieval period, that it was a period of stagnation or dark age. No, I don't think so. Because in many places, the tradition of knowledge seeking continued, and this relationship between reason and religion, uneasy relationship, however, continued. You have mathematics in three areas definitely: astronomy, mathematics, and medicine. You have very strong traditions which continue to flourish. Rather, more knowledge was added to it. In the middle of 16th century down to 18th century, you have a very flourishing, important Jawaharlal school of mathematics. It's another thing that in these places or in these areas, most of the knowledge generation or knowledge proliferation activity were confined to very small localities, for example, Abraham, or it moves in fixed terms. So Indian society definitely was not open to knowledge was not open to all sections of the society. There were problems, there is no doubt. But this doesn't mean that things were on decline. In late 18th, early 19th century, many people argued in favor of the decline theory. Even some of our very important publicists like Kumar, the great geologist who wrote 3 volumes on the history of Hindu civilization, he lamented so-called decline. Many others felt that the Muslim period was a disaster and so forth, and once the British come, things regenerate or improve. But these were probably written on the heat of the moment and for different reasons. There were many others who made very who made more perceptive comments, like Prof. Exactly a century ago, 4 years ago, he wrote History of Hindu Chemistry, where he gives a virtually sociological analysis of what went wrong. He blames the caste system, saying it was the caste system which closed the doors and on transfer of knowledge, closed the doors on transfer of knowledge, and made a distinction between people who thought and people who worked with their hands.
But the caste system came right from Vedas onwards.
Yeah, this is what we say.
Sorry, you have your time now. No, you can't speak right now, sir. Sorry.
It is PCA who's arguing. I'm not saying it. 1907, he says that it was the caste system which made knowledge restricted. And I agree with the point.
Not in the middle of that. No, this is not an interaction. This is a presentation. You'll have the opportunity later.
Don't worry, sir. No, I respect you. Come on. I will try to. So, this was one of the reasons which we are. And I think he had a point when he argued that there is disjunction appeared between people who thought and people who work with their hands. When people who work with their hands were pushed to the margins of society, margins of the village. So there is a distinction between finger and the brain. And both must move in coordination. As you know, science and technology. Technology is an artisanal activity at the same time. Most of the technologies we talk of today didn't appear from a university laboratory. No. They came from the artisans. The specs which you wear, the glass technology emerged out of ordinary people grinding glass, which led to the development of powerful tools like microscope, telescope and so forth, and made such a fundamental difference to the whole world. My society, one may argue, it's maybe provocative, but it is not that we didn't know how to make glass. We knew how to make glass. Bangles, Indian society has always been obstinate. So for more than 1,500 years we have been making bangles. Nobody thought of grinding glass. Our society, of course, because we have plenty of sun, so we had constructions which made of stone and marble. And the Muslims came, they brought the new technology of, this is what, baked clay and tiles and so forth and marbles. But all these things, the problem with the marble and the stone is, there is great architecture, no doubt. You have the tomb here, the great tomb, Humayun's, Taj and so forth. The problem only is they are aesthetically so beautiful, wonderful creations, not only from a structural engineering point of view also, they are remarkable, absolutely remarkable. But the problem with this is that they block light. And as you know, light is optics, it's physics. Somehow we couldn't appreciate the significance of light in our life, individual and social life. We paid a price. A society which plays with only stones and marbles will pay a price. Today you know that your ubiquitous mobile which you use, the chip, is not an extension of marble technology, marble society. It's the glass which works. We had ignored the significance of glass. And when even India, when it received the new knowledge, Islamic knowledge, Muttalite period, 9th to 12th century, highly fertile in terms of developments in the Arab and Persian world, most of these did reach India in its original form. India received Islam, which one may argue, which was post-Ghazali Islam. In post-Ghazali Islam, the emphasis was more on theology. So you had in 17th century Shah Waliullah's madrasa, where the emphasis is more on theology and jurisprudence, control, than on things which would have been different, than on falsafa, than on what is known as maqul knowledge. Maqul, not manqul. We would have done that had we seen. Now, Ghazali himself was a great philosopher, no doubt about it, but he is supposed to have stopped the growth of Muttalite ideas, the growth of rebels, who were practicing Muslims. It is not that they repudiated the Holy Book, no. Ibn Sina and others, no, not at all. But at the same time, they argued that truth is more important. Ibn Haytham in one place, 12th century, Ibn Rushd, he argued that how could the revelation or God reveal the word, the instructions in which language? Was it Arabic or something else? Does God speak Arabic? Or is there a language called God's language? How was it received? How was it transmitted? Did something undergo something went wrong in that whole process of transmission? He had to pay a price. He was immediately awarded ashes. And the situation probably in some areas, some places would be signed today also. But the questions were asked. Difficult questions. When you ask difficult questions, then only you say that it is a rational society. When the reason comes or aql comes into play. In Islam, a lot of emphasis has been put on aql. It is not the Prophet himself argued that for the sake of knowledge, if you have to go to China, go to China. One of my friends has recently published a book on Istihad, where he talks about how that tradition gradually was lost. And so questioning is felt. What I mean, modernity, how equates with questioning is felt. In Indian society, some or the other, the questioning is felt was not encouraged. Not only that the access to knowledge was limited, but the questioning is felt. Upanishad itself, you have an example, when Jawaharlal, the great sage, his wife, whose name you have two colleges here, so one of the wife asked him certain questions, he rebuked. He said, "Oh, you are asking too many questions. Shut up." As simple as that. We do it even now. Too many questions. Disturbing questions. So under such circumstances, the society faced certain difficulties and opted a trajectory which was different. Now, what was this trajectory? Again, little provocative, but do bear with me. Right from Adi Chandra till today, what our society witnessed was a number of social reforms. We have excelled in what one may call social engineering. Today some people talk of inner engineering also. I don't know what inner engineering is, but social engineering. Real material engineering took a back burner. After all, Vishkarma is one of my lowly gods, who worships Vishkarma. Our gods are those who are truly non-performing in a sense. Who don't work with their hands, they do magic. But they don't perform with their hands. So Vishkarma is a lowly god. You go to any doctor's house, you will see that he doesn't have Dhanvantri or Kumar in any clinic. You won't find. Because they are lowly gods. They don't figure in our system. Anyway, now what I am trying to argue is that our obsession with social engineering produced many remarkable minds. No doubt about it. So you have 13th century, 14th century, 16th, 17th, Bhakti movement, Nanak, Mira, Kabir, others. Remarkable, absolutely. No doubt. But we couldn't produce a Harvey, a Leonardo, and many others. The names which are familiar, I don't want to provoke you more. So why didn't we? Why couldn't we? How is it that we have been, and the more we talked about cohesion, the more divided society it became. I asked one of my teachers long ago, sir, more you have talked about secularism, more communal the country has become. कुछ तो कहीं प्रॉब्लम है, ऐसी दवा कर रहे हैं जो मर्ज बढ़ता ही जा रहा है, जितनी दवा करते उतना मर्ज बढ़ता है. So trajectory was different. It took a different trajectory, different growth, and there is something somewhere went wrong. P.C. Ray was right. A century ago. And we have to come back to it again. So, let me now move. And of course, when the Europeans come, there is a lot of cultural encounter in a sense that, whole of early 19th century, you are aware of the so-called Bengal Renaissance. We never had a Renaissance, but still people talk of Renaissance. I don't mind. Babus cannot have Renaissance, this verse cannot have Renaissance. But this is what happened. But there were social reform movements. Whole of 19th century, we have social reform movements. One of the interesting figure which in Europe also the debates are going on intense, one of the interesting figures is Thomas Hartway, who called himself a bulldog, defending Darwinism. He talked in terms of true religion and true science as twin sisters. One coming from Reformation, the other from Renaissance. But this term true is heavily loaded. Who determine what is true religion? Who determine what is true science? What constitutes true? How true can be true? So, and that debate continues. However, he made one interesting observation which we need to today keep in mind. Distinction between theology and religion. Theology is something which you wanted to have, not religion. It is theology which today promotes divisive, vociferous or fundamentalist ideology. Maybe, not religion per se. Because you cannot remove religion entirely from human life. Faith will be there all the time. After all, we are social, weak, and so forth. And you need something for solace, for social organization, many other things. So, unfortunately, unlike the West, in our country we never had a very intense debate on religion, reason, science. Intense. Again, intense is a crucial word. Everything we take it is compatible. You talk to a practicing Muslim, we are all compatible. What is wrong in it? We have been together. Religion and reason goes together. There is absolutely no problem. It is compatible. All the knowledge is in the Vedas, fine, Vedanta is there. So you have nothing to worry about. Recently, this one news came of the so-called damn God particle. They said, this justified. We had already, similar things. So the television news, etc., all blared Kandar mein Bhagwan. So it becomes. So we never had an intense debate where people could. This debate was always appropriated by people who were the dominant sections of the society and who were to use knowledge for a particular purpose. That is to perpetuate their domination. Anyway, I quoted P.C. Ray, but again I will go back to him. So you have a phenomenon where Bhakti is very dominant, where all other kinds of productive activities could be monopolized, rationalized, or utilized for the sake of perpetuating dominance. In Muslim times, you will see that ruling class Islam didn't make much attempt in India. In fact, Islam will pray to our caste system immediately. Our Islam is a very unique Islam. It's an Indian Islam. So here you don't have that Musalite spirit of the rebellion. And why should they make it? They were happy building forts and tombs and mausoleums. Can knowledge grow around mausoleums and tombs? Can tombs become, as for example earlier temples were, or people consider temples, can good knowledge develop around temples and tombs? Can they emerge in a nucleus? Was it possible to do good medicine or astronomy as part of those places where our society was most focused? Can Puri, Haridwar, Banaras, old Taj Mahal or anything could have led to? And that is why I argue that a society which excelled in making use of stones, marbles and iron, while Europe was grinding glass. And, I'm reminded of one very interesting instance. While grinding glass, Lee Van Hoek, the Dutch, he used to work as weight and measure inspector in the city of Leiden. He was the first to see microbes. Today we all know it is the age of biotechnology and so forth, and we take microbes as part of our existence. He was the first to see. And when he saw it in the rainwater, he looked at his urine, which he considered to be part of it. And he found that it is everywhere. And this is what life is, it moves. He wrote a very interesting letter to Royal Society in broken English. I have seen in the Royal Society archives that letter. One sentence he writes, 7-8 sentences, that's all. There he says, I have sighted a whole new world. A world which cannot be seen through naked eyes. If you grind the glass up to this point, you will see that there is life which moves. Now this use of the term sight is very significant. I had goosebumps when I read this. How many of us could display this what you call sight, drishti? We miss the sight. Somewhere we miss the sight. Indian society missed this sight, drishti. We had the knowledge, we could look, but this kind of very, very experimentally proved sight was definitely missing. When this East-West encounter comes, you have this, there were many people who looked to synthesis, dialogue, nuclear supplementation, etc. Only 2 months ago I came out with an edited book called Medical Encounter in British India, where we have talked about some of the examples in terms of medicine. And of course, one of the early modernizers who had a wider aperture, despite, or maybe because of traditional training, he was a product of Patna Madarsa, Ram Mohan Roy, and he talks in terms of religion of reason. A lot of work has been done on him, I'm sure, and he uses both the terms, Shastra as well as Yukti, whereby he puts equal emphasis on both and tries to reduce the tension, brings out a synthesis. It was absolutely a remarkable effort, and I believe a largely successful effort. And it has the best of the world in the sense that it enabled people to absorb culture shock, and at the same time enabled them to transcend the barriers of colonialism, and it fitted well with the dominant Hindu doctrine of epistemological pluralism. We have already practiced that pluralism. One of the, in Brahma Samaj, one of the important thinkers, Rabindranath Tagore, he talks of 2 kinds of Atma-Pratyay. Evidence. In rational thinking you need evidence. One he calls Swatah Siddha Atma-Pratyay, where you are convinced that it happens. Sun rises, or we know that it is the earth which revolves, Copernican revolution onward, and so forth. So these were certain things which were Swatah Siddha. The other was Vijnana Mulak. Now, Vijnana Mulak is something where you try to put it on an experimental, examine certain things on a critical or experimental basis. It is again during this period, mid-19th century, late 19th century, that you have many cultural interlocutors talking in terms of this dilemma. How to synthesize. Now, Ramon Roy faced the dilemma. He came out with an analysis. He came out with a worldview which suited, which was appreciated by many more people. But that didn't satisfy. There were many other questions which were coming up. So right from 1840s onwards till the whole of 19th century, early part of 20th century, you have the debates going on. Jawaharlal Sarkar was a medical professional. Later he was an iconoclast in many ways. Despite training in allopathy, he moved to homeopathy. He was one of the earliest to think of the significance of original researches in science. And it was in 1876 that he established the Indian Association for Cultivation of Science, which would be something like the Royal Institution of India or the Royal Society of India. He was a great man, absolutely much ahead of time, and his establishment of the Indian Association for Cultivation of Science in 1876, 9 years before Indian National Congress, I consider as a cultural response, as Indian National Congress was a political response to the imposition of colonial rule and colonial ideas. And Sri Ramakrishna, you have heard of him, again, there is experiential knowledge. Sri Ramakrishna is to be taken very seriously because, here he immortalized Anubhuti, experiential knowledge. Anubhuti. And there is a dialogue which takes place between Jawaharlal Sarkar and Ramakrishna. Ramakrishna underwent treatment for his throat cancer, unfortunate cancer, and Jawaharlal Sarkar, but he is not an atheist. People who talk in terms of reason, it is not necessary they were atheists, no. They were also believer, he is a believer. In fact, when he establishes the Indian Association of Cultivation of Science, or when he promotes science teaching among graduates in Calcutta, he says that these teachings must be imparted with a view that there was a creator. There is a first cause which makes everything possible. So he is not a non-believer, he is not an atheist, not even agnostic. Agnostic is a term again which Huxley promotes. He coins it and promotes it. It is not there as yet. So, but you still both argued about what you may call Jnana Vijnana, Para and Apara. Para Vidya, Apara Vidya. The saints made it clear that his concepts were related to God, and Sarkar, though a believer, could never accept that Apara Vidya was inferior Vidya. In fact, there is a very interesting instance which I have given you when Sri Ramakrishna explains God with form and what the formula in terms of an imagery. The imagery is very interesting. He says that it is the cooling influence of bhakti, faith, of course, he promotes faith, bhakti. The cooling influence of bhakti, freezing part of the ocean of consciousness into ice of different shape. So, when it the ice of different shape, then it is what is called sabun jisko. And when the heat of jnana, knowledge, melts it away, ice becomes formless, ramen, nirguna. Jawaharlal was immediately he picked it up and argued, commented, yes, when the sun of knowledge is up, the ice melts, and what is more, the heat of the sun turns the water into invisible vapor. So look, after arguing different positions, comes in very scientific terms, but very interesting. Islamic progressives in the same period, 1870s, also faced a similar dilemma. I came across a tract in National Archives written in 1877 by one Maulvi called Jawaharlal, who wanted to produce a society where we could have a Newtonized Ibn Sina or a Copernicized Ibn Rushd. This is very significant. So he wanted to bring Newton and Ibn Sina together, both separated by almost 700 years, bring them together. Their knowledge. Here is a modern man, Maulvi, Jawaharlal, who wants to benefit from that, who doesn't want to throw Ibn Sina out. This is not needed. Ibn Sina himself, a great scientist, experienced. So, and how to bring him close, that knowledge, older knowledge, bring it closer to the new discovery, new foundation, new things. Now this term, I was absolutely struck by the use of this term, literalized Ibn Sina. This presented a curious mix of both self-criticism and yearning for change. And this is a hope which is yet to be realized. We still haven't got that. Religion, of course, comes as a major obsession in almost every type of encounter, political, social, cultural. It's very natural. All of us feel torn at one point or another. All of us have the question of faith coming close to us. In Bihar, working in Bihar, as you know, I come from there. So long ago, as early as 1868, Bihar had a scientific society. Today, people laugh at the very mention of Bihar, but we had a scientific society. We didn't produce scientists very few, but and there again, one of the objectives was that to bring Western science and religion together, not to create dissension, but to synthesize. And this society didn't encourage fanaticism. Its founder, Imdad Ali, he was a subject at Muzaffarpur. Unfortunately, his papers are lost. He used to bring out in Akhbar also for Akhbar or Yam. And I couldn't lay a hand on it despite all day. But at one place which I found in a private paper of someone else, there he writes, very interesting full quote I have given it. Syed Ahmad Bareilly, 1820, styled as Imam Kumar, used to collect money for jihad and declare Hindustan as Darul Harb. He was killed fighting in the Punjab. After his death, his followers made a statue of his, probably Ranjit Singh Sahib was killed. And it was placed on the top of one of the hills of Afghanistan and showed to the people from a distance, saying that the Imam of Jihad was still living. By this trick, they continued for a long time to collect immense sums of money to carry on jihad. And then Imdad Ali adds, may God preserve all Muslims from the snare and fraud of these misguided and bigoted men. How ahead of time Imdad Ali, and what contemporary relevance his warning and advice has. It is still correct. 1888 is right. Probably the best example of those who try to synthesize is Syed Ahmad. He argued, he was a modernist. In fact, because of these nature-related ideas, in fact, a fatwa was issued from the Mutawalli of Kaaba, Wajib Qatl, and he had to suffer. But here was a person with very well-established notions, and he was not scared of. And he easily talks about that, scientific exploration shouldn't be looked into scriptures. It is not in the Quran nor in the Holy Book that we should look for scientific revelation or scientific investigation. No. He was absolutely correct in that. Sayed's close associate, Munshi Jawaharlal, he was even more emphatic. He wrote that God has given human beings the ability called reason, akal, to discover and comprehend. And then he argues, reason is to knowledge what sun is to light and eye to vision. Reason is to knowledge what sun is to light. However, it is the late 19th and early 20th century that colonial arteries or the social arteries had begun to harden. It is not without significance that Muslim League was founded in 1906. Again, it is during the last decade of the 19th century that you have caste associations coming up, all Sawaj and so forth. It is again in the first quarter of the 20th century that you come across reformers and activists like Maulana Maududi who argued that geography, physics, chemistry, biology are taught without reference to Allah and His Messenger, and therefore they are a source of gumrahi, so they shouldn't be taught. Earlier they were being taught in that way Nizami in Lucknow. Not in Delhi, but Lucknow had a much more rational curriculum in which But now, in early 20th century, first quarter of 20th century, things were going to change. Similarly, in 1913, you have in other parts of the country discussions, similar debates going on. In the 1920s, the famous instance, Meghnad Saha, he gains lot of fame through his ionization theory. He is now considered as father of modern astrophysics. So when he gained a lot of fame, he came from a poor family in Dhaka, he visited his hometown, where a bar employee barrister heard of him, and he came to see him. I've forgotten his name, but this bar employee barrister asked his Saha to explain to him, in ordinary terms, what his all new investigations were, what his new discoveries were, ionization. Saha explained it to him. Then the barrister said, oh, what is new in it? It is there in the Vedas. Again it was explained for another 15 minutes. The barrister was less than satisfied. He said, no, it is there in the Vedas. After 45 minutes of discussion, Saha threw his hands. He gave up. He said, oh, Sabai Vidyasi, forget it. Everything is in the Vedas. I have no argument. The story cannot go on. So it moved. So if everything is in the holy scriptures, then, argument is stopped. And this continues with now. The same dilemma continues to plague us. One of the advantages of this rationalist discourse was, as you know, Mehta Saha played an important role in the international movement, which we need to recognize in terms of, his role in National Planning Committee, his journal Science and Culture. He was close to Pandit Nehru, turned against him, joined the Indian Parliament. He is known for, unfortunately we haven't done a very detailed study of the early parliamentarians, and he died on the Parliament street, almost forlorn. One of the examples of this rationalist, advantage of this rationalist discourse was that rationalism was seen as something inherent in human nature, and not a result of European speciality itself. No. So it could be the Western rationalism could be used against West itself. Easily, the tables could be turned. And his process, however, was not linear or smooth. It had its own inherent disabilities, which came into an opening during partition of the country and continued to simmer thereafter. Now you know that this whole thing has ruptured the process of secular democratization as nothing else. There are certain other arguments also when one can look into whether one can treat dharma as religion or not. Radhakrishnan would rather treat it in terms of philosophia apparatus, anatta, based on, again, anubhuti. So this dichotomy between anubhuti and logical, experimental, Baconian way of looking at things remains. Christianity and Islam had both problems to face. This is where I would like to end. That of creation. Last section of Indian society didn't have to face this problem. Thanks to Darwinism, the whole genesis was thrown into turmoil, theory. While our people, especially people like Bangam Chandra, immediately accepted, saying, no, this is what our incarnation, Dasavatar is. So from lower form of aquatic life to the higher form of Krishna, we are evolving. This is what Darwinism is. But in Islam, this was a huge problem. In Islam, this created so much, I have so many other details that I won't go into, I have referred to some of them. In Islam, there is one more example of Jawaharlal Afghani. He visits Calcutta in 1880s and talks about how to put Islam compatible with science, etc. He talks about Darwinism, saying that, not Darwin, but the previous work on genetics, they argued that if the tail of the dog is cut several generations, then you may get a tailless dog. Okay. So, probably a Mendelian sort of formula was inserted and so forth. Now, Jawaharlal Afghani argued, Darwin saab ghalat hai, wo kaise ho sakta? Had it been so, Jews, Muslims, Christians have been practicing circumcision for thousands of years. अभी तक कोई बच्चा तो उसके साथ पैदा नहीं हुआ होगा. So, had it been true, then we should have circumcised kids. We are not kidding. What does it mean? That means that Darwinism was wrong. This is the argument which is very interesting argument. But this is how people try to grapple with this thing. Another argument he gave was that if evolution takes place like this, then someday elephant would become mosquito should become elephant. This is stretching the logic. Mosquito in Arabic is called barghous. He talks about it. Haven't in great detail I'm going into. But some of the questions and quick conclusion is the reason of science the only route to human wisdom? Can science itself be viewed as a tight-knit relation? Sometimes science can be it. Science also has its own hope. If you are convinced of your own superiority and you create problems. Does religion alone have a monopoly over dogmatism? Is it solely responsible for the divisions and strife that we see in our world? Thanks to the greater globalization and rapid technological changes, during the last 3 decades, religious fundamentalism has grown, and local ethnic nationalisms have, this is a very loaded term, but anyway, local ethnic nationalisms have politicized religion as nothing else had done ever before. Similarly, religious nationalisms, be it in our own valley or Chechnya or elsewhere, have religionized politics to a point of no return. So we have a very difficult situation facing us and our future. I may be wrong, I wish I am proved wrong. It's not the biblical meek, but probably the religious that will inherit that. Thank you very much for your